the serial killer who hunted in broad daylight. The summer sun was blazing over the small town of Fairfield. Children rode their bikes down the sidewalks, and neighbors chatted in front of their houses. It was the kind of day that felt safe, ordinary, even boring. But that illusion shattered when a scream ripped through Main Street. In broad daylight, in the middle of a busy town, a man had attacked a young woman right outside a grocery store. People froze in shock. They watched as the man didn't hide, didn't run into the shadows. He stood tall, calm, and walked away with blood still on his hands, slipping into the crowd like it was nothing. The townspeople couldn't believe it. Who would be bold enough to strike in front of witnesses under the full glare of the sun? Police sirens filled the air minutes later, but the killer was already gone. Mothers pulled their children close, shopkeepers locked their doors, and whispers spread like wildfire. We have a killer here, and he's not afraid to be seen. To understand how the horror reached this point, we must step back a few months earlier, when Fairfield was still calm. It was a town where everyone knew each other's names, where the postman waved at you each morning, and where Sunday barbecues were the highlight of the week. People left their doors unlocked, and kids played outside until the streetlights came on. Ethan Moore, a quiet man in his late 30s, was one of those faces that blended into the background. He worked odd jobs, walked with his head down, and lived in a small rental house on the edge of town. No one paid him much attention. To most, he was just another ordinary person passing through life. What they didn't know was that Ethan carried something darker inside him, something that had been growing stronger with each passing day. The first sign of trouble came when a teenager, Amanda Blake, didn't see home one afternoon. She had left school, backpack slung over her shoulder, but she never arrived at her house. At first, everyone thought she might have run off with friends. Her parents called neighbors, checked the park, even drove around town. By evening, the sheriff was involved. A search party combed through the woods, fields, and parking lots. Nothing. Amanda had vanished in the middle of the day, and nobody had seen a thing. The town buzzed with confusion and fear, but after a week of no leads, life slowly slipped back to normal. Parents became stricter. Children stayed closer to home, but the tension faded just enough for people to breathe again. It seemed like Amanda's disappearance was going to be one of those sad mysteries that lingered but never got solved. Until the second attack happened. This time, it wasn't a quiet disappearance. It was loud, sudden, and bloody, and it happened in the open. In the bright light of afternoon, with dozens of people around, the killer struck again. And when the crowd realized what was happening, the air filled with panic, screams, and the undeniable terror that Fairfield was no longer safe, not even in the sunlight. And then, just as the police closed in, the killer turned and looked directly at the crowd, his face calm and unbothered, as though he wanted them all to see. The town of Fairfield was no longer the same. The grocery store steps, once a spot where kids bought candy and old men shared gossip, were now stained in memory with fear. Yellow police tape flapped in the warm breeze, and reporters swarmed the scene like vultures. Their cameras pointed at the spot where the killer had walked away so casually, their voices repeating the same haunting words. He struck in broad daylight. Sheriff Tom Briggs stood in the middle of the chaos, his jaw clenched, his hat pulled low. He had worked in Fairfield for over 20 years and had never seen anything like this. He wants attention, Briggs muttered to his deputy. He's daring us to catch him. The thought chilled him because he knew what it meant. This man wasn't finished. Back at home, the townspeople locked their doors, something they rarely ever did before. Mothers clutched their children's hands tighter, and fathers stayed up later at night, listening to every creak and sound. Fairfield was small, but the fear now felt bigger than the town itself. Everyone was looking over their shoulders, wondering if they'd be next. Meanwhile, Ethan Moore watched the news coverage from his small, dimly lit living room. His face barely moved as the reporters spoke his crimes out loud. To him, it was noise, background chatter. He felt no shame, no regret. If anything, the attention gave him a twisted sense of power. The daylight didn't scare him. It thrilled him. He believed he was smarter than the sheriff, smarter than the whole town. The police worked day and night, but the investigation was messy. Witnesses contradicted each other. Some swore they saw a tall man in a black jacket. Others said he was average height, wearing a baseball cap. The killer had walked among them, yet nobody could agree on what he truly looked like. It was as if he had blended into the crowd, wearing invisibility like a mask. For a while, Fairfield held its breath. Days passed, then a week. The tension eased slightly, though nobody fully relaxed. Maybe, just maybe, the killer had left town. Maybe they had seen the last of him. People wanted to believe it so badly that they convinced themselves it was true. Kids started riding bikes again. Neighbors met on porches, though their laughter was nervous. But the calm didn't last. On a bright Saturday afternoon, the town gathered at the park for the annual summer fair. Families filled the grassy field, music played from speakers, and food stalls sent the smell of popcorn and hot dogs into the air. Children laughed, teenagers flirted, and for a moment, Fairfield felt normal again. Then, without warning, the screams began. In the center of the fair, a man had fallen, clutching his chest, blood spreading across his shirt. People scattered in all directions, shouting, crying, stumbling over one another. The killer had struck again, in front of everyone, under the burning sun. And this time, he left something behind. A note. The note was small, folded neatly, and placed beside the victim as if it were part of a performance. Sheriff Briggs picked it up carefully, slipping on gloves, his heart pounding. The words were written in jagged, hurried handwriting. "You can't stop what you can't see. The sun is my cover." The crowd gasped when news of the note spread. It was no longer just a killer. It was a taunt, a challenge. The townspeople realized this man wasn't hiding in the shadows. He was turning Fairfield into his stage, striking boldly where he knew everyone would watch. It was terrifying, but it also meant one thing. He wanted to be noticed. Detective Briggs and his team launched a desperate hunt. Officers patrolled streets in broad daylight, scanning every alley, every crowd. They checked security cameras, but the footage only showed a blur. A man moving quickly, blending into ordinary faces. "He knows where the cameras are," Briggs muttered. "He's planned this." The weight of it pressed heavily on him. Meanwhile, Ethan Moore walked calmly through town like nothing had changed. He bought coffee at the diner, nodded politely to neighbors, even stopped to pet a dog on the sidewalk. To everyone else, he was just quiet, harmless Ethan. No one saw the darkness he carried inside. He enjoyed the fear in the air, the way people jumped at sudden sounds. It was like he was invisible, hiding in plain sight, and nobody suspected a thing. The fairground killing shook Fairfield harder than Amanda's disappearance or the grocery store attack. Parents pulled their kids out of school, businesses closed early, and the mayor begged residents to stay indoors. But people still had to live. They had to shop. They had to work. And that's what made it worse. No one knew when the killer would decide to show himself again. Briggs stayed awake late into the night, his office walls covered with maps and photos. He circled places, marked times, trying to find a pattern. But the killer had no pattern. That was his trick. He wanted to keep them guessing, to remind them that anywhere, at any moment, he could strike. And then, just when Briggs thought he might be closing in, the phone rang. His deputy's panicked voice came through the line. "Sheriff, it's happened again." Briggs froze. "Where?" There was silence on the other end for a moment. Then the words came sharp and heavy. Outside the elementary school, in the middle of pickup time, the scene outside Fairfield Elementary was chaos. Parents screamed, clutching their children as officers swarmed the parking lot. Bright backpacks and scattered papers littered the ground, a grim reminder of how ordinary the day had begun. In the middle of it all lay another victim, a father who had come to collect his daughter. His lifeless body was sprawled beside his car, his keys still in his hand. Sheriff Briggs pushed through the panicked crowd, his voice hoarse as he barked orders. "Get the kids inside! Move everyone back!" His deputies rushed to secure the area, but Briggs's eyes locked on something near the victim. Another note. He crouched down and picked it up with shaking hands. This one read, "The children laugh, the sun shines, and still I walk among you." The weight of the words hit him harder than the blazing heat of the day. The killer wasn't just taunting them anymore. He was promising he could strike anywhere, even in the places that were supposed to be safest. Parents wept openly, pulling their kids close, some begging Briggs to end it before more lives were lost. Inside the school, children huddled in classrooms, wide-eyed and silent. Teachers locked doors and drew curtains, trying to keep the fear from spilling over. But the whispers among the kids were impossible to stop. "What if he comes here?" one boy asked softly, his voice trembling. Meanwhile, Ethan Moore sat on a park bench just blocks away, calmly sipping from a soda cup. From where he sat, he could hear the faint sirens, see the smoke of panic rising in the distance. His lips curled into a smile. He liked being close enough to feel the fear ripple through the town, to watch the world spin around him while no one suspected. In daylight, surrounded by people, he was invisible. But Sheriff Briggs was growing desperate. That night, in his office, he gathered his deputies. "He wants us, scared. He wants us chasing shadows. But every man who thinks he's untouchable makes a mistake." He slapped his hand on the desk. "We're going to find him." The team worked through the night, cross-checking security footage, witness statements, and maps. Then, just before dawn, a deputy burst into the office holding a stack of photos. "Sheriff, you need to see this." It was a set of camera stills from a gas station near the elementary school. The frames showed a man in a baseball cap buying a soda just minutes before the attack. His head was slightly turned, but his face was visible enough. Briggs's eyes widened as he whispered, "I know that man." And in that moment, the hunt turned personal.